But it was very much like, it's very much, okay, this is a massive book. This is a great book. This is very scary. I have this safety net who is Richie Robertson, so hopefully it'll prevent me making any howlers, and I'll do the work to try and minimize the risk of making howlers. But this is a one-off opportunity to explore this novel, to explore this world, to explore what I am capable of researching and doing and creating. And I just didn't feel like jeopardizing that. Yeah, I've had a few of these situations where I put to them this Klein aber Dein, which Hans Castorp says to Claudia when she lends him his pencil. And I had a kind of scale, okay, well, this is really close, down to what I finally did, which was your quilt, my thrill, which is like a bit overt. It's a bit overtly sexual. And I did do that several times where I just like, okay, why not? I'm just going to, we'll just bring it out.
Solomon and Smith.
Look over there. Follow my finger. Just look at this. Look at those trees. The snow here. Look at these patterns. Look at the way this valley slopes down. Not sure if you can see it, but the little town on the edge there. And this cove here, look at that. And whoa, this valley, a lovely one. I am sat on a bench here in Graubünden in Switzerland. I'll just make myself a little bit brighter. If you follow that sort of line of mountains for a while and then take a left, you end up in Davos, home of the World Economic Forum, everybody's favourite economic forum. And if you had tuberculosis and were hanging around Europe in 1910, Davos was a great place to come and smell this curative mountain air, which, as you can see, cures all diseases. In 1912, Thomas Mann visited his wife in Davos at one of these sanatoriums, the Wald Sanatorium. He found it a very unusual place, and it left a really strong impression on him. He wanted to freeze this impression in a short novella, like a little 70-page thing that was going to be a companion piece to his novella Death in Venice, which he'd recently finished. While he was working on the novel, the First World War broke out, and suddenly it felt impossible to write the novella he was planning to write. The First World War opened up such a gulf in time that suddenly time itself became the main character of the story. Suddenly the world in which Thomas Mann had visited his wife seemed impossibly remote, almost ancient, and he realized a different kind of novel was writing itself almost under his pen. It grew and grew and grew for years and years. Like the protagonist of the novel, Hans Castorp, what started out as a relatively small project, namely writing a novella and going on a short trip to visit his cousin, respectively, expanded and expanded in years and seemed to envelop more and more material. And the novel feels almost even longer than it is, which is an extraordinary thing to say considering we're talking about a huge 1,000-pager here. It seems very pregnant and alive with time. The bells going there. Time. 2, 3, 4. 4 o'clock. It will never be 4 o'clock again. This book is, of course, The Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann's best book, one of the best books of the 20th century in any language. Every single one of you watching, please do go away and read it. You're about to watch an interview between me, Milo, and Simon Pare, who has recently translated all 1,000 pages of Thomas Mann's often quite dense and unusual prose into English for Oxford World Classics. The Magic Mountain has been translated in its entirety twice before into English, most famously by H.T. Lowe Porter, who's a bit like the Moncrief to Thomas Mann's Proust. She introduced most English speakers to Thomas Mann. When we think about Thomas Mann's reception in the English-speaking world, it's often being filtered through H.T. Lowe Porter. Then, fairly recently, I think maybe about 20 years ago, I'm not 100% sure, but a guy called James Woods did a translation. And Simon Pare has just published his this year in 2026, but he's been working on it for quite a while, as you need to. It's ridiculously. Oxford World Classics, please do not pay me to translate The Magic Mountain. I refuse the job. What on earth?
I also feel I should just let you know before the video begins, this is mostly a conversation about translation. We are going to have a conversation with Richie Robertson about more of the sort of content of the book in a few weeks, but this is a conversation mostly about the language of the novel and about some of the problems of translating the novel. Stay tuned for another discussion in a few weeks about the content of the novel. Also, apologies for some of the web connection issues in this interview. There's a bit of a delay and some points where the audio drops out very briefly. Apologies about that.
Please like this video, leave a comment down below. If you're not already subscribed to Solomon and Smith, please subscribe. If you like what me and Milo are doing here and you'd like to keep Solomon and Smith going for eternity, please consider supporting us over on Patreon as well. We're enormously grateful for the help we get. Without any further ado, though, here is Simon Pare.
Where are you joining us from today, Simon?
Just west of Zurich.
How are things there? Have you lived there for a while?
We were in Paris before. We moved here 8.5 years ago or something.
Yeah, whenever I go on the train through Zurich, it has like a curious kind of characterless quality, at least the parts next to the train track. It's like a very default kind of city. Yeah, everything around it's gorgeous, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, there's some nice parts. What's striking is it's very, it's kind of very quiet. It does feel a bit dead because there are lots of parts with not very much traffic in them. It's very mineral city. It's very stony. It's very kind of stoical and Protestant.
And is Mann buried there?
Mann is buried in Kirchberg.
Yeah, so it wasn't a Viking funeral or anything. You could go and rob his bones
No.
if you wanted.
I don't think so. I don't actually know how the funeral happened. What's striking when you go there is so I went to make a little film for my blog on the day of his death, on the anniversary of his death, a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And what's striking is that all his kids, well, Katja's buried next to him, his wife, and 5 of his 6 kids are buried there. The one exception being Klaus, who's buried on the Côte d'Azur. And then 4 of the kids are buried around the parents, and Golo is buried on his own within sight, but in the middle of a patch of grass. It's odd.
Like Jacob, like an Old Testament prophet, like Jacob and all his sons going to the tomb, the family tomb.
Yeah. It's kind of striking. It's not very far from where where they had their last family home and where Katja lived until her death, and Gulu until his death.
Yeah. So we start these chats with a poetic epigraph. I'm going to read an Eichendorff poem called Todeslust. Should I do it in German and English? Yeah,
let's go for the international crowd.
Todeslust. Bevor in die blaue Flut gesunken, träumt noch der Schwan und singet todestrunken. Die sommermüde Erde im Verblühen lässt all ihr Feuer in den Trauben glühen. Die Sonne, Funken sprühend im Versinken, gibt noch einmal der Erde Glut zu trinken, bis Stern auf Stern die Trunkene zu empfangen. Die wunderbare Nacht ist aufgegangen. Death Drive. Before pouring into the blue flood all his breath, the swan sings and dreams, drunk on death. The summer-weary earth in petal shapes leaves all her fire glowing in grapes. The sun spews beams as it sinks, sending the earth one last ember to drink, until star on star, wrapping the drunkards tight, unanchored dawns the wonderful night.
Who's the translation?
That was me. It was very free, but I kept rhyme.
Yeah, nice.
So what's your relationship to the German language, to start with, Simon? Yeah, I gather you also do French translations. Just what part has like German in general played in your life?
Well, I started, like quite a lot of people, I started French first at secondary school, and then Latin, and then German. And I had a pen friend in each of French and German, but whereas the French pen friend's family was quite conservative, and his father was a colonel and a doctor, my German pen friend came from a very kind of green, ecologically minded, left-wing family, and I found that a whole lot more interesting. And I went on my first demos with them, went on my first big cycle rides. And through my friendship with my pen friend, which lasted a very long time, I don't know, that just kind of sparked my affinity, a greater affinity for the German language than for the French. Which is strange because I lived in Paris for 20 years. Both my daughters were born there and are French citizens. But somehow my liking for German language and for German literature was always greater than for French.
And what was some of
good
the
to have a
first books you fell in love with? Go on, Milo. Yeah.
No, it'd be good to have a Latin pen friend. Member of the clergy, probably. Just to
the
give
Vatican. I could have gone down the local Roman Catholic Church and maybe asked for one. I'm not sure how good an idea that was at the time.
I'm just asking in German, who were some of the first authors, the first books that you really enjoyed, that you really loved, on a kind of pure, aesthetic level?
Well, I suppose from kind of my own from school, I was because there weren't very many people doing German. Then I did like the whole kind of Borchardt, Anders, all of that. The stuff which came out after the Second World War, related to the Second World War experience. I suppose the first one I first read it in English and then read it in German afterwards was The Tin Drum. I would say that was kind of realizing fairly soon, one after the other, that I could also, I could read it in English and then I could read it in German, just a few years afterwards, and see the difference in all of those. It was the Ralph Mannheim translation, it was the first translation, so I haven't read the second translation. I don't know what it's like.
And I gathered translating in general came as kind of a late career move for you. You were like doing other things, and then could you talk a bit about how you got into translating, into literary translation?
Yeah, so when I spent my gap year during my undergraduate degree, I did French and German, and I spent that on an organic farm in Germany because I'd had a gap year where I'd done what most people do in their university third year, is either teach or go to university, and I'd already done a bit of those and knew I wanted to do something different. And I'd been interested in environmentalism, and I went to work on an organic farm in northern Germany. And so I followed up with that by kind of doing some, after I graduated, doing some work on organic farms here and up on the Alp, making cheese here in Switzerland, and went into fair trade after that. And after doing about 8 years in fair trade, I decided that I wasn't reading enough. I wasn't involved enough with texts, and I tried to get into publishing, but the French were kind of very sniffy about it and said, quite rightly probably, and said, we're pleased to tell you that you have absolutely none of the qualifications that we're looking for in an editor. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe something I enjoyed as an undergraduate and maybe a sneaky way into the publishing industry and working with books was as a translator. And so I started off translating film scripts and treatments and applications for European funding and various other quite boring things. I mean, that was the good bit. I was translating stuff about paints and wood and cellulose for a marketing board and stuff like that. I haven't actually had to draw on that very much so far as in my career as translator. Yeah, and then but clearly the intention was to get into literary translation, and I finished that. My first book was, I think, 2010. So I've been trying for about 4 years by then.
Just generally among the sort of crowd of wood and cellulose translating folk, are all of them kind of frustrated literary translators?
I shouldn't think so. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure they've gone elsewhere now because that kind of work just doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, yeah,
but I mean, there may be a small percentage, higher percentage maybe among the people who are doing subtitling and treatments and scripts like I was doing. But then again, I was also struck by a comment someone made when I first started translating books, and someone who was a subtitler said, "What, you mean you really translate every word?" And because of course it's a wonderful thing, subtitling, because you have 3 ideas and you can only afford to fit in 2, or you try and elide them so that you can get as much across in a short space as possible.
Yeah, and I wonder that with dubbing as well.
Yeah, it fascinates me with subtitling. There isn't really a known culture around it. With translation of literature, you have sort of translators who are known, who are beloved, who are controversial. But with subtitles, it's a basically unknown field. And some of the great kind of, film literature is being translated. We know of kind of Ozu and Bergman through these people, and yet we don't really know who they are, their process, their biases. I mean, it was famously the recent retranslation of Tokyo Story by Ozu removed one of the most famous English lines, which is something like, "Isn't life disappointing?" which you'd often see quoted and screenshotted and so on. But apparently a more accurate translation from the Japanese did not include that English line. And it's sort of just, we just have to deal with that now. But I feel at least with literature, we have a sense of, modus operandi, what I'm trying to keep, what I'm trying to lose. But yeah, subtitling still exists in this slightly vague, very practical, well, just translate the words, universe.
Yeah. I mean, in France, there was a prize every year for kind of the best subtitling, the best subtitling of a film. So there was some recognition for it. There was also actually a lot of subtitling of films into English, which was being done in France. And I also did one at one stage for the Berlin Film Festival. We did a kind of bridge translation from a Japanese samurai zombie film, which I worked with a Japanese to French translator, and then did the French into English, and that was all being done in Paris. So if it's not happening in Paris and you're not getting the recognition there, then kind of where are you really? Because that seemed to be the European film capital at the time.
Yeah, like one of those great anonymous artisans of the medieval period plying their trade. They don't need to be known. They don't need to be remembered. The work is the memory.
Yeah. And I wonder what happens, whether I mean, I suppose those two copies with the Ozu film with the two sets of subtitling are still out there somewhere. But whether anyone is, yeah, I suppose in that case people were interested at, okay, so why has this famous line suddenly disappeared? In the same way that they might be interested in, we have a book and the words that we used to quote have now sound slightly different.
Yeah, or like I was reading a recent translation of Twilight of the Idols, and I think whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger was whatever doesn't destroy you makes you stronger. Small change, but still, like it's yeah, it is unusual when a quote becomes extremely famous in a target language. What you do with that as a translator, because then it has a slight. Because the translator knows the culture around the quote as well. There aren't really those sorts of problems in Thomas Mann. There isn't really a famous line in the Zauberberg, but maybe there is a certain style associated with especially the low Porter translations. Oh, yeah. I'm curious, when you first read Thomas Mann, was it in English or was it your first encounter in German?
I guess it must have been during my undergraduate degree. I don't think, I may have read one of the short stories beforehand, but I don't have any abiding memory of having encountered him in English. No, I don't think I've ever read him in English.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because I first read the Zauberberg as the Magic Mountain when I was 23, Hans Castorp's age when he goes up. And I just reread it last year, age 30, the age of Hans Castorp when he goes down, in German this time. I don't know if that's visible because of the background, but
yeah, I can see it's the Fisher.
The Fisher one, and there are lots of things that change, partly because of age, partly because of familiarity with the language. Didn't speak German then, speak German now, and loads of qualities of the novel that were less pronounced, more pronounced. There's also the issue for me that his prose is difficult. It's a really difficult German, and I was almost worried while going through it. Maybe have I just lost the ability to read German?
Don't worry. Sometimes I felt the same.
And I would flip over, read like a paragraph from like Hermann Hesse or something, and go, "Oh no, this makes sense," and then just realize not merely a question of the famous grammar, the famous ridiculously long sentences, the verbs that take half an hour to appear, but also the vocabulary. The sheer breadth of Mann's vocabulary is extraordinary, and often when I was reading it, I'd be asking Anna, "What does this word mean? What does this word mean?" She's German, and she would just often the answer would be, "I don't know. We never use this word." And yeah, I'm just curious, like, was when you first read The Magic Mountain and when you first got the commission to do a translation, were you kind of intimidated? Did you feel a bit like daunted by the task?
So two separate things. When I first read it, I can't really remember. I just remember that I absolutely loved it, which is it's strange when I then talk to people afterwards about translating Thomas Mann, and half of them kind of looked at me in pity for two different reasons. One of them was, "Oh my God, that's hard," and the other one was, "Why on earth would you want to spend any time with Thomas Mann?" There are a lot of Thomas Mann haters out there. And then there were lots of people who thought, "Wow, what an honor," which of course was my reaction. The first time I read it, I was an undergraduate. We had wonderful lectures on it, and I can't really remember. I didn't feel intimidated anyway.
Sure. Okay.
Why would you? You're going to go through it. You've got people explaining to it, and stuff. Of course, when I was contacted by Richie Robertson, to translate it for Oxford World's Classics. Um, my first thing was, yes, I would absolutely like to do that. And my second thing was to absolutely brick myself and say, oh my God, how much more high profile a translation can you do? Do people still compare the translations? Do they sit down and study them? Do they call you out on them? It feels slightly different in the sense that I can't feel any sense of responsibility towards Thomas Mann in the way that I would feel a sense of responsibility towards a living author. For example, Christoph Ransmayr, whose work I've translated a lot of. I feel a great sense of responsibility towards him because he's alive, because it's out there in the world, because it's representing him, and because I feel concerned that he should be happy with it. With Thomas Mann, it's obviously not to do with him or anyone in his family. It's more to do with, okay, well, am I capable of this? And what are people going to think when it comes out?
Mechanically
How critical are they going to be? Sorry.
Mechanically speaking, how does a new translation of such a significant work come into being? Sort of shop talk. I know that currently Oxford World's Classics is doing a kind of a whole set of new translations of Thomas Mann. But what is the inner mechanics of, all right, this great work which has one or two established translations, we're going to revisit it and reattempt it? Because as you say, there's something in that that's colossal. It's a lot of exposure. What is the motivation and then the whole process of this will be the work and we're going to bring it back out in a new version?
Well, I mean, the basic motivation is that the rights are free. It's in the public domain since this year, since the 1st of January, because it was 70 years since his death. So that that's what interests Oxford World's Classics. Yeah? You don't have to. I mean, it's a great shame for Fisher that they're no longer going to be able to kind of cash in on regular payments. But for Oxford World's Classics, that was that. What's surprising in Oxford World's Classics is how few translations from the German they actually have. I don't know whether you've looked, but they have a bit of Fontana. They have Faust. What is there? About 5 or 6 books. I mean, it's really tiny. So I don't know how it came to pass about when they started planning it, because I obviously wasn't involved in that, and I was contacted only at the beginning of 2022. Well, let's say someone talked to me about it a few years before, but I kind of expressed an interest, but it wasn't Oxford World's Classics who were asking, and it went nowhere. And then they got in touch with me at the beginning of 2022, and they said, "This is, we've got everyone out. All of the other 4 volumes of our new collection are covered, but we have this one, which is free." And first of all, my mind boggled that nobody would have actually wanted to do it. But I was on board immediately. Then I had to make it work financially, because that's the other thing. Yeah, you're going to be spending a large amount of your time doing this when you're not doing something else. And Oxford World Classics work mainly on a basis more like as if you're an author, and therefore you're earning a higher royalty and a relatively small advance. And so to take the shop talk just one level deeper, that I had to then kind of find out if anyone in Switzerland would be willing to finance this, which is weird, yeah. Which is a very strange model. It's kind of. I've started to feel this a lot about translations into English. Actually, it's really quite parasitic, because it often involves someone like Pro Helvetia in Switzerland or the Goethe Institute in Germany stumping up funds to ensure that any of these books gets translated in the first place. And does that happen the other way around? No, that doesn't happen the other way around. Yeah,
it's the free market
power, and so then I secured the funding, and and then I could start.
Yeah, I'm just imagining publishers' offices with enormous calendars with like copyright expiries on each day, waiting for the time they can publish the complete works of one guy or another. And Thomas Mann's time has come. So maybe lots of
Yeah.
new magic mountains will occur, various levels of quality sprouting up among the place.
Well, there's one which has been in the pipeline for a while, which you probably know about, which is Susan Benofsky in the States for Norton, because she started. I mean, she published something in the New Yorker about it back in 2020, I think, and I think by her own admission, she started work on it in. I think. Okay, so my theory is that it's she wanted to take 7 years over it. I have no idea of knowing this, but for the new French translation, the translator, what's her first name? D'Oliveira. She, I can't remember what her first name is, but she said in interviews that she'd taken 7 years over it. It makes me feel a little bit inadequate. I haven't spent 7 years over it.
Do it in 2 weeks, like the original planned stay.
But yeah, I mean, there could be, who knows how many AI translations they're going to be out there.
Yeah, instantaneously produced. How did it feel with a sort of simultaneous translation going on across the Atlantic? Did you just not think about it, or was that a sort of present, how's she doing this sentence?
That's a good question. Early on, there was kind of a temptation to get in touch with Susan and to say, I don't know what's, but then I started thinking about it. I thought, to do what? I mean, what are we going to do? Yeah, it's interesting that she does it, but I don't know. First of all, I want to do my own translation. And secondly, is this going to be reassuring? I don't think this is going to be reassuring.
How are you doing kurzweilig, Susan? How are you? What was your biggest headache?
Yeah, someone actually suggested it because there's this thing. Kurzweilig und langweilig is it kind of still pursues me. You know, in a sense, I'm looking forward to seeing Susan's translation to see, has she solved it? Has she solved it any better? You know, has it? There was that one, and we'll come on to it. But there's one of Frau Stör's malapropisms, which I came up with a good solution to on the night before I handed it in. I'd been living with it for 2 years or something, and you think you found a decent solution, but somewhere in the back of your mind, it's nagging away at you, and you're thinking, I'm sure I can do better. And then it just takes something, and it's usually a conversation or a random encounter, and then suddenly you think, okay, now I'm on the right path. Now I know how to plot this out.
Yeah, I'm just. Are there any of those compromises? Any of those annoying compromises? Annoying little. I wish I'd found something better. Things that remained in the final draft.
I'm sure. I was just looking forward through it this morning, just to have a kind of refamiliarize myself with some of the passages and some of the tone of the different bits. And there was one point where I just thought, oh my God, why didn't I put hushed there? Why didn't I put hushed? You know, I don't know. You know, I could go through it any number of times, and I would come up with other bits of things where I think really nagging ones. I don't know. I haven't looked at it in detail for a long time since I went through the proofs last summer. But I was still changing stuff in the proofs. They always tell you, of course, that you're not allowed to change anything, but there's a certain tolerance. But
I think it's interesting that we have these translations over 7 years, because the subject of the book is so much not merely time, but how time is shaped and how time is used. And maybe there's something arbitrary and the number 7 is all over this book for reasons I do not completely understand. I'm sure by the end of this I will. But this sort of set 7 years, but of course 7 years can be rather different to another 7 years, depending on how exactly the time is filled and what you do with it. And I imagine 7 years translating the Magic Mountain is quite different to Hans Castorp's 7 years on the Magic Mountain, which start very long and then kind of squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. And I'm reminded actually of a line in Parsifal, the Wagner opera, maybe the best single line of any opera in an opera that otherwise has lots of strange and meaningless lines. But it's Gurnemanz who says, or sings, "You see, my son, time here becomes space," which is very similar to sort of the Hans Castorp
The
mental
first chapter.
discussion, exactly, going up the mountain and understanding that time and space sort of have this intermelding quality. And maybe it's the case that these 7 years translators should also be heading up mountains to sort of distant sanatoriums in order to embody that time with a certain quality. So for you, you're under 7 years. I mean, it was still quite a few years. But how did that time feel while in the Magic Mountain? Was it any different to another translation job, to life in general?
Yeah, it's been very different for a number of reasons. I mean, one of them was the feeling that someone was kind of looking over my shoulder the whole time, which you don't have when you're doing the first translation of something. So that was one not entirely pleasant feeling. I mean, but that just comes with the territory. That's fine. The other one was that before I started, a mate of mine who runs a kind of social media thing, he said, "You really should be doing something on social media about this." And I'd already kind of, in the back of my mind, I thought, okay, this is a big project. It's going to take me a long time. I'm going to dig up lots of bits of information which I'd like to store somewhere. I'd like to have a chronicle of this. And so I have my own website. I was going to keep my blog. And then he said, "Well, you should, you can make some little films about this. You can, you can do this," which was terrifying. Um, and actually, in some ways, that a little bit overshadowed. It maybe took a bit of the pressure off the actual translation, because I sometimes felt more worried about actually doing my social media posts than I did about actually doing my work each day. But it was at different stages, because I needed to kind of get to know the book again, and I needed to do my sample for it to have my sample accepted. So this was in 2022 by the board of Oxford World's Classics, and that was accepted, and we signed the contract by the end of 2022. Is this right? Yeah. And then in 2023, this all feels, no, it must be 2023. And then in 2024, then I kind of started working on it and reading up and stuff. But I actually had quite a lot of other works that I needed to finish first. And so I only got down hang on. God, see, this is what happens.
It's happening. It's happening.
It's exactly what happens. It feels like I think it was 2022. Yeah. So by the end of 2022 I signed. Yeah, I had to hand in at the beginning of 2025. Yeah, so the whole of the 6 months at the end of 2023 and the whole of 2024, I was doing it. And I deliberately set myself a thing. I'm going to go nuts if I translate this every day, all day, every day. And I can't afford to, because I need to earn some money on the side. And I also have things like, I was working on Angela Merkel's memoirs with the team at the time. I was translating a wonderful short novel from 1927 by a guy called Peter Flam called The Shadow of Myself. And so I said, okay, well, I'm just going to adopt Thomas Mann's rhythm. He famously just worked from 9 till 12 each day. And then he did other stuff in the afternoon, attended to his correspondence, played loads of records to his family, walked his dog and stuff like that. And I'm just going to do the Magic Mountain in the mornings and do something else in the evening. And I worked out pretty quickly that a rhythm that would get me to the end in the allotted time and felt enough to be in the flow of it was about 5 pages a day. I mean, obviously then you scale that down to rereading and stuff like that, and you're probably working at about 2.5 pages a day, but
Yeah, and I imagine not all pages are equal. I'm just doing 5 pages and then one of them comes at you. It's the snow chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, the snow chapter, or of course, all that stuff about when he's all the anatomy stuff. I mean, that's amazing. That whole, it's amazing, but it's just, it was incredibly hard. I found going through all that anatomical stuff before he comes to like the pinnacle of life and the tableau of life and his realization about birth and about, yeah,
Because it's not only specialist vocabulary, but slightly antiquated
yes,
specialist vocabulary on top
yeah,
of that.
yes.
You did a lot of research for your translation into Mann, into the Mann family. You posted a full list of all the books you read on your blog. I'm curious, did you ever find yourself mirroring Hans Castorp's own research at all into botany, into anatomy, into
I mean, thank goodness for the internet. You know, we can look up all these things. It takes a lot less time. No, no, I couldn't not out. I mean, purely out of interest. You know, I was not interested enough to go into and do days and days of reading of anatomy and botany and stuff like that. I was really very, very purposeful in how I approached researching those bits.
I saw a book
But
on Freemasonry in there. So
yeah, that was very interesting. That was very interesting, and turns up like there are a few mistakes in the, or there are a few, let's say, questionable things in the novel. Sometimes when he forgets the number of steps, sometimes when he forgets who's sitting next to whom, and also one of them was about one of the ranks in the Freemasonry. That according to the different charts, I was looking about the Scottish order and this order and stuff like that. Then the Prince of Jerusalem is sometimes like God knows what, the 23rd rank or the 23rd grade or the 22nd or whatever. But yeah, there were quite a fun bits like that, and looking into Walpurgis Night and stuff was interesting as well.
And
But
to keep go on.
no, I was just going to say that I did at one moment and I used this as a kind of title for a talk I gave, was like Hans Castorp c'est moi, because you do find yourself very, I mean, by the novel itself, but also by the position of translating it, of being in his position of having to find out a lot about lots of subjects that you didn't know about before.
And doing your sort of 5 pages a day, and this is a regular rhythm, did you find the way that felt to change over the, year plus you were doing it, in the way that Hans Castorp, when he gets into the rhythm of the 5 meals a day and, you do your thermometers, and eventually it seems to just fly by like it's nothing, even though initially it was extremely, tedious having to do these things. Did you have a similar experience because it was so regimented?
In the sense that it obviously it gets easier. It just gets easier. It's the familiarity that it breeds is very welcome, and yeah, I find after a while. I also, because of holidays and stuff and needing a bit of time off, I actually had to accelerate a bit towards the end. So I had to do 7, but I actually felt as if the 7 or 8 towards the end was the equivalent of doing 5 at the beginning.
What was some of the ways you approached the infamous grammar, the huge sentences, the prolonged sort of reveal of the verb? Can you think of any specific instances where you came up with like a solution to something that might be helpful to think about?
Yeah, I printed out a few things. I mean, obviously you won't see them, but one of them is so there are 2 scenes which I've previously used also examples of doing this. It's not necessarily about one verb, it's more about long sentences where it's very intricate and you need to unpick it and rearrange it in English. One of them is when Hans Castorp and Joachim Thiemsen go to visit tous les deux with her son who's dying, and there's kind of, denn während tous les deux in ihrem schwarzen Kaschmirtuch, den schwarzen Schleier unter dem Kinn geknotet, Querfalten auf ihrer engen Stirn und ungeheure Hautsäcke unter ihren jetschwarzen Augen, mit krummen Knien wandernd den Raum durchmaß, den einen Winkel ihres großen Mundes harmvoll tief hinabhängen ließ und dann und wann sich an den am Bette sitzenden näherte, ihren tragischen and so on and so on and so on, like 20 lines of this long thing with French in it, with you, and then you finally get, after they've done all these things, and it's auf den Zehenspitzen hinauszugehen. And there's no, it's I don't think I came up with any kind of particularly amazing kind of solution to it, but I think it reads quite well. For while tous les deux paced around the room with knobbly knees, in her black cashmere shawl with the black veil knotted under her chin, furrows in her low brow, and enormous bags under her jet black eyes, one corner of her large mouth drooping grievously low, approaching the young men sitting by the bed now and then to parrot her tragic phrase, so ihren tragischen Papageienspruch zu wiederholen. Da, 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 da. And then where he has I mean, this is the thing as well with the punctuation, yeah? I often found that I needed to put things in between dashes in order to separate out a particular thought, but not bring the sentence to a close. So my idea of the whole time was, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to keep the sentences going for as long as we need to, unless there's really just an overwhelming reason not to do it. But where he puts a dash here, then I put a semicolon, and I find that I quite often did that. That's, I would think, okay, well, he's got a semicolon, but I need a dash here, and the other way around. He gesticulated, tore his shirt open to bare his yellow breast to death's blows, and conducted himself in this manner until a coughing fit brought a fine pink foam to his lips, stifling his rodomontades, and prompted the cousins to tiptoe out of the room. Yeah, so we kind of end up in the same place, but it's just the rearrangement of stuff within the sentence. And there's a bit which I absolutely love. I don't know whether you feel the same about it, which is when this Karen Karstedt, the one with the chafed ends of her fingers, who's dying and who they kind of take pity on and accompany to various things, including sports and stuff, when they take her to the cinema. And you get this kind of incredible description of a reflection on what this new medium film is doing and how it might have come about and what it actually does to the people in the room now and how distant they are from it and yet at the same time how close. And here, so in the middle of it, is this all right if I read out like
yes,
the German
please.
and then the English? Let's see, do I? So selbst ins Bioskoptheater von Platz führten sie Karen Karstedt eines Nachmittags, da sie das alles so sehr genoss. In der schlechten Luft, die alle drei physisch stark befremdete, da sie nur das Reinste gewohnt waren, sich ihnen schwer auf die Brust legte und einen trüben Nebel in ihren Köpfen erzeugte, flirrte eine Menge Leben, klein gehackt, kurzweilig, there we go, und beeilt, in aufspringende, zappelnd verweilende und wegzuckende Unruhe zu einer kleinen Musik. So okay, flirte eine Menge Leben zu einer kleinen Musik, and in the middle of it, all this zerhackt and stuff like that. And the only way I could do it was like a vast amount of life flickered across the screen before their aching eyes in a bitty, thrilling rush. So slightly, I've added something there.
Bitty.
Images suddenly appeared, jittered briefly, and were jerkily snuffed out to the strains of some light music. So I couldn't quite get it with just the words that were there. I had to add something to the rush, and then I think later on I had to have a stream or something like that, just to be able to get all these different actions, these verbs of actions, and this incredible kind of jitteriness and flittering into it. And so. Yeah, sorry.
Go on. Yeah.
No. I was just say, yeah. So there were that's the kind of compromise that you make. Yeah, you were asking about compromise in one of your questions.
Yeah. I was going to bring in another necessary compromise, being with the enormous figure of Peter Peeperkorn, and his incomplete sentences, which
Yeah.
very, very natural in German in a way, because you can create a long sentence and then miss the verb, and suddenly the whole thing is kind of strangely abstract. And I'm curious in the way that German as a language alters the way one thinks based on this fact. You have to be patient. You have to let someone complete their thought because otherwise you have no idea what the thought is. Whereas English is an easily interruptible language,
Yes.
as we constantly do, because you get the verb so early, you sort of know where they're going with it. But when
Yeah.
you get a character whose language is defined by this self-interruption, how on earth do you go about thinking, well, the grammatical structure is so different, but we have to maintain this sort of rambling, inarticulate man who says a lot of words but says nothing at all?
Yeah, well, in that sense, I suppose, I mean, it would take me too long to kind of actually look up any particular examples. But I suppose you've got kind of strategies. You can kind of front load the sentence, or you can turn it around so you can make a passive or something like that, and then you leave off the sentence at the end, the verb at the end. You can also signal the verb just by a letter and have it break off there. So it actually just says but and then what? Yeah. There are things, there are tricks you can do, but whether they all work, I probably wouldn't swear by it. But in my translation, but hopefully most of them do.
Yeah, I have to say one of the main things that stuck out to me reading it in German, as opposed to the English, I read the Low Porter one 7 years ago, is the how vivid the dialogue is, how vivid the characters' voices are. You know, without attribution, that Behrens is speaking, or Settembrini is speaking, or that Naphta is speaking, or that Hans is speaking. Hans in particular, this sort of cliche-ridden language, this language that's how to describe it? Always sort of searching, but never very confidently. It struck me as something that was, really, really different. That I really didn't remember this being so vivid. This way of speaking, the way the speech is rendered. I'm curious how you approach these different characters. Did you have like a set way of writing a Settembrini sentence as opposed to a Hans sentence to make sure that you did distinguish them, or was it just speech by speech?
No, there were clear mark. I mean, it depends, because some of them I would argue are kind of more specific than others and more identifiable than others. Yeah, I mean, Behrens has been a classic case on the one Germanic end, I would say, of the spectrum, and Settembrini being the example on the very Latinate end of the spectrum. And that was how I would go about it. Okay, so you have a spectrum,
right.
and you have Settembrini on one end, and you have Behrens on the others, and everyone else is kind of somewhere in between. Yeah.
Okay.
So taking Behrens, it's great fun. It's an amazing amount of fun translating Behrens.
Dickens character, really big.
Absolutely, absolutely loved it. And the thing is, because I'm the first Brit to translate it, then Behrens is someone you can just bring in lots and lots of British expressions. I mean, I had him saying, I was looking today, and I had him saying to Hans Castorp one sense, "my old mucker," or something like that. Because there is that sense of proximity and familiarity and care and concern in Behrens. When towards the end, when the great Torpor, the chapter, when he is very concerned that he's not going to get well because he seems bored. He seems bored. So it's like, okay, we'll invent some things for Hans Castorp to take part in, almost to keep his pecker up.
Yeah.
And so Behrens could say that. What did he say? He has to come across as being quite avuncular, quite down to earth. And he has to, when he uses a word with a romance root, then it has to be chosen. Yeah, it has to stand out because that's what he does. When he says like, wie ist die Befindität? Wie ist heute Ihre Befindität? And you just think, what? I mean, that's a made-up word, and maybe he's got it wrong from somewhere else. But so he says, he meets them coming in from the garden, and he says, immer auf der Walze, war wohl fein in der großen Welt. Ich komme gerade von einem ungleichen Zweikampf auf Messer und Knochensäge. You know, he's mixing his metaphors. Große Sache, wissen Sie, Rippenresektion. Früher blieben 50% dabei auf dem Tisch des Hauses. Jetzt haben wir es besser raus. Aber öfters muss man doch Mortis Causa vorzeitig einpacken. Na, der von heute konnte ja Spaß verstehen, blieb für den Augenblick ganz stramm bei der Stange. Wie ist die Werte Befindität? So like you've got two things you mark in that sentence which you leave, which the mortis causa you leave, obviously. The Befindität, you need to find a thing which sounds just weird. So rather than him saying, so how's your constitution today, my gents? And he says,
sensibility or yeah.
How's your constitutionality, gents?
Okay, yeah.
And then he says, always on the hoof, I see. Lovely out there in the big wide world. I've just come from an unequal battle. It was on a knife edge or a bone saws. Serious business, you know, a rib resection. 50% used to stay on the slab. We're better at it now, but we often have to knock off early, mortis causa. Anyway, today's was a good sport. Hung on bravely for a while there. How's your constitutionality, gents?
Yeah, that's
so
great.
Here's the one end.
Yeah.
And then you've got Settembrini at the other end, where he's always described as like it slides off his tongue.
Plastisch is
tongue.
the word
Plastisch.
hands often use. Yeah.
He says plastisch. I need to solve that. So I got graphic. I saw that John Woods also had graphic for that, but I thought it was the only choice. And it says his words melt on his tongue. So there, roll out the long words because he's pompous, because he's pedagogical, because he's, and use as many kind of Latinate words as possible. But I mean, at the end of the day, what's common to all of them? You have to find the rhythm at some stage. Then you just realize it's right or realize it feels right to me in any case because okay, there's now a nice rhythm to this. Apart from, of course, Peeperkorn, where the whole idea is that there is no rhythm and that it keeps getting broken off. And the other thing is, the other question I had was about the use of man. One. How often do I use one? Who says one? Who says you? Who says we? Sorry?
I've been known to use one in a sentence. I quite like one. But yeah, there are definitely times when you feels more normal.
How about you, Milo? What would you say?
Yeah, I suppose there are ways around it. Going too extreme with the ones gets, one says to oneself, and there's the tendency to go. Then there's the rather outmoded him and his as default, which is also a little bit, I don't know, it doesn't quite chime with the times, and you go with these guys. Yeah, one is not frequently used. Occasionally, you can throw a one in there. You sometimes feels wrong because it feels like I'm addressing someone, even when it does feel like, and this is what you do.
Yeah.
The English language has a problem. We need to introduce man in a kind of sort of caveman style.
Man go there.
Might not be the right times to be doing that. But it's a marker, so you can use it. So what I did with Settembrini always says one, for example. Castorp, I don't think he says one. He may say in my translation, he says you.
Yeah,
and
makes sense. Yeah.
And I think the other interesting one is Joachim Simpson, because my feeling was he loosens up quite a lot while he's there. Because he reinterprets what his sense of duty and honor, what this means. And I think, although I haven't checked it again, that he moves from more of a one person to more of a you person or a we person.
Okay. Yeah.
And that you can kind of track people's development and their how they settle in, because it's all about, this is a novel about adjusting and settling in. You can track that through, how you use the man, how you translate man. Yeah.
And another tricky thing, which is I think very related to that, is really it's a tricky thing in translating many languages into English, is the lack of the formal and informal registers in standard English speech. And this sort of haunts a lot of literature. Technically, thou is the informal, which feels wrong. And then England became a country of entirely formal people, which feels culturally accurate. No one is on an informal basis. We're all, in a way, a universe of equals. In another way, everyone is extremely unable to speak
Business
openly.
colleagues, mothers and daughters are just business colleagues. Yeah.
And we encounter it sometimes, even in Tolkien, who is conscious to these things. He pretends, or does he, that his work is a translation of some old text he's found, which had gendered language. And then in his sort of notes, he's trying to express in the appendices, how do I encounter gendered language? Because there's meant to be a whole section in which Pippin goes to Gondor and refers to everyone with a familiar tone. And this shocks everyone. But obviously this can't be translated. And occasionally he does throw some vowels in, meant to be familiar. But now when we hear the mouth of Sauron before the Black Gate say thou to Aragorn, it sounds like he's being a very old-fashioned kind of ancient villain, when in fact Tolkien wanted that to be almost insulting, to talk down to a king. So this is lost. But then the Magic Mountain, we have quite a lot of the formal, informal with regard to Clavdia and with regard to Peeperkorn. And you get round it by referring a lot to sort of first name basis. But does this require some real sort of wrangling of sentences and interactions?
Are you saying I get round to it, or are you saying that generally people get round to it?
Well, I noticed that you used a lot of the first name being the way to. In English, it's more of a sense of how you interact with someone than the sort of grammatical system in use. But did this require really sort of changing sentences and scenes to enable that change?
Well, I mean, the very first time it happens is when Joachim picks him up off from the train, which is a weird situation because they're cousins but they've never talked to him. And I think what he says, yet since they could not really address one another as Castorp and Simpson, they avoided names altogether. This was a long-standing habit between the two cousins. So I thought that was kind of that was all right. Maybe a little bit later with Clavdia. I think I do say once, like no, that's right. It's when Peeperkorn invites the Emerencia, the waitress. He kind of tells her that she should bring him some liquid bread, and he kind of talking to her as do and stuff like that. I think there I slipped in a familiar because maybe I could have left it out. Maybe it's enough because he starts calling her Emmy and Rencia and stuff like this, and he starts using, kind of that form of diminutives and abbreviations of her name. I think there were maybe a couple of times where it was more of a problem, and it's maybe less elegantly solved than others.
Somewhere it feels a bit more like crucial for the plot, especially in the French exchange with Clavdia on Walpurgisnacht and the little exchange with Settembrini about it earlier during Walpurgisnacht. It's part of the way that Hans Castorp feels able to approach Clavdia is because he's in this dream world where you can duzen alle and he goes even there into a dream language of French. And I suppose in that regard you can put the problem one degree removed, because you can say in French they have this system of informal and formal. I didn't read your translation. Milo did. Did you leave the French part as French?
I did leave the French
Yeah,
parts French, yeah.
yeah.
From what I can recall, what I did there and with Settembrini was just he doesn't say anything about first term name terms. He just calls him by his first name.
Okay.
So he just says Lodovico, and then the other one goes, "Why, what? Why are you calling me Lodovico?"
Mm.
And the same with kind of Claudia, because although he would have known Lodovico's name, maybe Claudia just didn't expect him to actually know her name.
Ah, sure,
It's
yeah.
because he hasn't really talked to her properly. So what it brings across is that actually he's been taking an interest in her for longer than she's realised, and he's been asking people about her. Which there's this whole back and forth with who is it, probably with Frau Stör, is it about okay, oh no, it's not Frau Stör, is it? It's the
It's
teacher,
yeah, whatever she's
Frau
called.
Engelhardt.
That's the one, yeah.
About so what's her name? So is she this? Is she that? Or maybe she's called Natasha, or maybe she's called this. Mm.
Another classic translation problem into English is gendered nouns. There were a few ones that I thought were quite interesting, where it's crucial for the plot, and often about Claudia. So there's a point quite early in the novel where Settembrini is talking about having spent the previous evening on the balcony with some Russians und Russinnen. Er sagt mit viele Russen
Oh yes,
und Russinnen.
yes.
Which in English you could translate as I was on the balcony with many male Russians and female Russians, but that would just sound kind of absurd as dialogue. And I just wondered how you approached that problem and similar ones.
The short answer is I can't remember exactly, but what I would imagine is that I could kind of Russians, both male and female, or both men and women, or something like that. So it was clear, but without having to have Russian men and Russian women and something. Yeah.
And there's also the ways in which Claudia's identity melts into the identity of Pribislav Hipper, Hans Castorp's childhood crush. There are loads of moments where the gender of the pencil, for example,
Yes.
switches between languages, and for Hans, for the reader, that's quite crucial. I think during the snow chapter, during Hans's sort of reverie, when he's sort of like half asleep in a pile of snow, he says sans crayon, and notes that it's sans in French because the pencil is male, but she's not male.
Yeah.
But then she sort of kind of is as well, because she's an avatar for this previous lost love. And how did you approach that?
I think that works, doesn't it? I think you can just work that. I mean, I'd have to look back at it, but I think that can just work to one. As you can just, because again, as you said, you're at a distance of having the French there, so he can explain the French to himself.
Sure, yeah. Oh, and
And what
English,
is
I
it?
think so. That'd be right, wouldn't it?
yeah, and English is the same, where it's like his pencil refers to the owner of the pencil rather than to the pencil itself. Yeah.
Yes.
And what is it like
true.
having these large passages of French, especially in the Walpurgisnacht sequence, which are then untranslated but also unaltered? I know in the appendix it is translated, and then that exists there, but it's sort of injecting just pure man into your translation, in that you don't touch it, you do nothing with it, you just work around it, and most English readers probably won't be fluent enough in French to just. It's the interesting thing with an old Russian novel. You open it, 20% of it's in French, on the assumption that the learned readers, they can encounter this. This isn't a problem. But yeah, how does it sort of feel to have this, this quite extensive sequence in it's just man, it's untranslated man, and I'm working around it, but it can remain exactly as it is.
Well, one of the things is also my editor was very keen that we didn't correct any any mistakes and stuff in
Okay.
so if there's a missing accent or something in I think that in any case he's very kind of purist in those terms. Okay, there's a mistake here in certain in certain places we can put an asterisk and we can do a note about it. In other places, it's just going to have to stand. In the terms of that French passage, so you'll know that Low Porter, her expectation was in the 20s was just that everyone who's going to read this novel was going to be able to read it in French. What I read about Johnny Wood's translation was he was actually in favour of doing what we've done, but that Knopf didn't want to do that. So they just put it in English in italics. My original idea, which I couldn't adequately defend and which got overruled, was that I wanted to suddenly have like a postmodern bit in the middle of this modernist novel where we would have massive footnotes taking up like a section of the page. I thought that would have been a lot of fun, but I was very, very much overruled on that. Yeah, so what you're left with having it in the appendix. But I thought it would have been great to have this the English translation of it gradually eating away at the pages with the French dialogue, and it just to make it even weirder, because obviously this is weird when you're translating all of the novel and you're not translating this.
Yeah. It's related to that, there are quite a few sections where Settembrini especially quote something, whether Goethe or Schiller or Novalis or whoever. How did you approach these sort of citation sections? Did you do your own little translation of Goethe? Did you look for like a translation from the 20s or something like that?
So the Goethe, I went with the Bayard Taylor translation. I looked at lots of translations. Hang on, I need to look at my note and see exactly when the Bayard, because I wrote my note on the translation. So 1870, 1871.
Like a Victorian one, goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, because I went through all of them and I compared them, I thought, this is the only one. First of all, it's very kind of melodic and pleasing. And I just thought, I can get to the 1871 or I can get the 1951 or whatever, I'm going to have to choose one which is anachronistic as it is. So I'll just choose the one. And I discussed that with Richie Robertson, the series editor. And then, the great joy of doing this is never have I worked with an editor who has such a grasp of the whole of German literature and the German language as Richie Robertson.
Yeah, he's totally astonishing. We've been in correspondence with him, and he said, I'm retired now. His retirement consists in editing like the entire Oxford World Classics Thomas Mann publications and translating Dr. Faustus.
Yeah, he did the work which I wouldn't. If he'd offered me Dr. Faustus, then if he'd said, "Well, we've got someone for everyone apart from Dr. Faustus, do you fancy it?" I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'd have done it. So I'm glad that he did that one. And going back to the thing about how long, the experience of time, 7 years, and how long does it feel like? Then Richie, he probably spent 7 years on. What did he tell me? He said he'd been working it maybe for 4 years. Dr. Faustus for a few hours every morning, I'd understood 1 hour every morning, which I thought, wow, that's kind of quite crazy. You dip in and then you have to dip out again. But I suppose it depended on how much other work he had to do. Anyway, yes, it was amazing to have him and to have him read kind of essentially every word I'd written and to question it or challenge things and the quotes from German literature which I couldn't identify, he did. It's lovely to have that safety net and and he would usually point me to a translation or tell me how I might adapt it or that's really invaluable.
Yeah, could we talk a bit about compound words? One of the things that people who don't speak German, maybe they're just thinking about learning it or something. It's an interesting thing about the language. You can just stick words together, and there are lots of them in the novel that are kind of crucial. We've talked about kurzweilig, langweilig. Maybe we could develop that a bit. But also, I was thinking just normal day-to-day words of the sanatorium. Liegekur, the novel's name itself, Zauberberg. What was your approach to compound words? Were you trying to chop them up, usually hyphens?
Not really hyphens, I don't think. I mean, there's a question about the title, which is, is this going to be called The Magic Mountain? My influence over that is small, So we could have
The
come
Magic
up with
Mountain with a hyphen would be a bit silly.
Yeah, I mean that would be silly, but even like another thing. I mean, he clearly said in a letter to Low Porter, because the Beinecker Rare Books Library at, hang on, is it Harvard or Yale? Yale, I think, has got their correspondence, and I asked for their entire correspondence to be kind of sent to me digitally, and he's very clear that should not be called the Enchanted Mountain or something like that. It has to be called the Magic Mountain, and then he kind of gives his reasoning for it, of magic having a different sense than enchanted. It's the mountain in itself and of itself, which is magic. It's not a spell from outside, which is cool. There are called these Liegekur. There's a thing called a Sonnenlampe or something.
Yeah,
like
stimmt.
that. There
Yeah,
are all these bits of stuff. Just went with sun lamp. I actually had a contact who not only grew up for his early life in the Schatzalp, in the hotel and ex-sanatorium, which kind of appropriated the legacy of the novel. But he also ran it afterwards, and he has probably one of the largest collection of sanatorium instruments and medical apparatus. And I wrote to him and just said, so what was the word for this? What was the word for that flask? For the what's it called again? The Blauer Heinrich.
Yeah, Blue Henry.
Yeah. So these things. So some of those I could sort out like that. Liegekur. I turned that over. I wanted to use the word remedy. I wanted to get away from the word cure, but actually I found at the end that there's probably no way around it. It was going to be a rest cure. It was just going to have to be rest cure. And the same for the Liegestuhl. I spent a lot of time at the beginning thinking about what this Liegestuhl was going to be called. And someone wrote to me from Davos, we have a translators group who meets at the James Joyce Foundation every month, and we bring out problems, and I solicited them quite a lot. And someone wrote from Davos and said, it's called the chaise longue. I was like, really? But it may have been called that at the time, but I can't get away from the fact that people are going to have something incredibly different in their mind if I write that it's a chaise longue. They're going to be dragging out their ottoman from the back and stuff from there. So it had to be. I came to the idea that it had to be a lounger. And I felt I got quite attached to the thing of the exquisite lounger. He praises the qualities of this lounger. The kurzweilig, langweilig. I look forward to seeing what Susan Bernofsky's going to do, because I did go all the way around the houses. I asked my group. The best I came up with was this boring and absorbing, because at least like some similarity between the words and the sounds in the words. And
yeah.
Am I 100% happy with it? Maybe not. Am I 95% happy with it? Yeah.
Yeah. Did you attempt to be relatively consistent with vocabulary?
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. You weren't like, okay, in this sentence, the word absorbing doesn't sound as good as diverting, or any compromises like that. You were like, no, it's this word is this word. It has to be.
I think there's one instance where I turn it from an adjective into a verb.
Okay.
I think there was one time, if I'm remembering correctly, where I had to adapt. Yeah.
Wow.
But otherwise it worked, and my feeling was, diverting is too far away, and it doesn't give you the same sense. What I liked about absorbing was that it gives you a sense that time doesn't matter, that time is gone. Boring, the time drags on. If you're absorbed in something, then time becomes irrelevant
Yeah.
to how you do it.
And I believe towards the end of your translation, when you were reaching the final phases, or at least of each block, you then look at previous English translations which you hadn't read. I mean, you hadn't read one in full, as you said earlier. Was there anything that sort of interested you when reading them? Any sort of fascinating decisions, anything you really disagreed with, or kind of an ingenious turn? I mean, especially with early translations, you often get quite large, almost paraphrasing. People will take a difficult section and just say, okay, it's better if we rewrite this. Did you encounter anything like this, or were tempted to anything like that when looking back at these sort of reverend older translations?
Do you know, my confession is I didn't. I haven't looked at those translations.
I mean,
I
you
thought
just
I thought I was going to. I got I've got them both, and I thought I was going to. And after a while, so I sent them in 200 page packets to Richie. And then we had a day where we sat down and went through the first half, and then we did the same for the second half. And I thought my idea was when I got to what I considered my final draft, that I would sit down and go through the translation. And when I got there, I really just could not be bothered. That's not to say that I didn't look up to see what John Woods had done about Kurzweilig and Langweilig. And I did look up a few other things, especially if I had a little doubts. There's a time when, in the Great Tetchiness, in the Große Gereiztheit, near the end, where the anti-Semite arrives and complains about how he's been placed between his previous sanatorium's been placed between Herr Hirsch and Herr Wolf, and that he had to go. And Hans Castorp thinks something which is a little bit, I can't remember the exact wording of it, and it sounds a little bit off. It sounds a bit odd. And I checked at John Wood's translation there to see what he'd made of it, and wasn't convinced by what he'd chosen. And therefore, I took it to my meeting, and our monthly meeting, and we came up with something that had the right amount of the kind of right dismissive quality. I was saying it's not good riddance, but it's something like that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's my confession. I couldn't actually be bothered to look at them. I think I might do sometime soon. I might go back and actually look at them. But while I was involved in doing it, I felt, on the one hand, that I didn't want to be influenced, and I found after I'd bought John Woods' translation, I felt the temptation for about a week. I had it next to my desk. I felt this very strong temptation, especially in that bit where about the anatomy, to go, oh, do you know what? I'll just look at it. And then I thought, I can't do this like this. I'm going to have to put it away and really take a vow that I'm not going to look at it. I did look a bit at the French translation, and I've done that before. I did that with Christoph Ransmay's free verse novel, Der Fliegende Berg, where I looked at the French translation. I found that helpful. And the other thing about not looking at the translation was, okay, so one trap is that I copy them, or I think, oh, that's nice. I might just, use that. And then I find I'm doing it more and more. And the other thing is I find that I am in competition with them, and that I actually then go looking for something just so it's not at all like either Low Porter's translation or Johnny Wood's translation. And I thought that was just as unhealthy, actually.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing about influence and having read another translation and knowing it is you can't then remove it from your head. It's a sort of semi-permanent act. As soon as you read that paragraph, even if you forget the particular wording, you know how they did it. And it's, I don't know, maybe we don't take it seriously enough. I mean, there's often, read everything, but also you can't unread something. And
Yeah.
if you're in a particular position as you are of, okay, I'm familiar with the man, and maybe I'm looking at the French translation, but I haven't read an English translation. This is a
Yeah.
kind of unique situation and it can't be replicated. As soon as you pick another one up, that state is gone. You were changed. I mean, it's your own kind of Hans Castorp experience. You've been in the Magic Mountain, and you can't
Exactly.
unbe in it. You've got that in you in some way forever. And it's just in all sort of creative activities. Often we encourage people to sort of look around and take in as much as possible. But I wonder if there's some good advice of things not to look at or things to avoid. Just kind of that ignorance or the blinders that can allow you to move forward. In a previous episode, we talk about Harold Bloom's anxiety of influence, this idea of sort of romantic poets being crushed and diverted by the knowledge of their forebears. And you have to wonder about, or maybe the artist who doesn't really know that much about his forebears is liberated in a way. And it's we don't have the supreme mind where it's like, okay, I know all of these things, and I can simply
Mm.
choose to ignore them as I would like and work completely free. So I think you sort of phrase it as a confession, but perhaps you can remodel this is my method. My method is never to look at these other translations to enable myself to not either react to them or imitate them.
Mm. Well, so my confession applies only to the fact that I obviously created a different expectation or a different understanding of what I was doing than what I was really
Mm.
doing. Because I did intend to do it, but then I just didn't because I didn't feel the need anymore. But it was very much like it's very much okay. This is a massive book. This is a great book. This is very scary. I have this safety net who is Richie Robertson, so hopefully it'll prevent me making any howlers, and I'll do the work to try and minimize the risk of making howlers. But this is a one-off opportunity to
Yeah.
explore this novel, to explore this world, to explore what I am capable of researching and doing and creating. And yeah, I just didn't feel like jeopardizing that. Um, yeah,
Mm.
I mean, for good or worse. I mean, it's yeah. I get asked this question a lot. Like, what do you do with the translations which are out there? There's how do you and also so with I think in the last few years there have been 8 German translations of 1984, 8 new
Wow.
translations, and they'll all be slightly different. People will have all have slightly different methods. There's one of them. Oh, what's his name? Very famous translator. His name escapes me at the moment. But I know that. Well, I know through a mutual friend that he said, "Okay, mine's going to be the best. Mine's going to be the best." And what he did was he put it all in the present tense. He moved it. He moved. That's right, isn't it? It's all written in the past. He moved it all into the present tense as a way of just completely
Yeah.
separating himself from them. Apparently, it's brilliant. Apparently, it's totally brilliant. But I mean, I don't know. Then there are. I mean, there are so many things, so many factors. Like how comfortable do I feel doing this? How much part of the tradition? How much am I going to stick to? The accepted route. How many liberties am I going to take? I mean, it was surprising working with Richie because in some senses I thought, okay, he's going to jump on this one because I'm talking about the nanny. There's this thing called Regenschirmzeitläuften. It comes up at one stage. Behauptete, dass diese Verehrung des Einzellebens nur den allerplattesten bürgerlichen Regenschirmzeitläuften zugehöre. So this is Naphta, complaining about how soft everyone has become and how unused to kind of thinking for themselves and stuff. And I was toying with the word nanny. I mean, it's obviously got nothing to do with Regenschirm or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I was trying, and we got into the meeting, and Richie said, "Come on, go the whole hog." It's like, okay, just use nanny state. Don't, because I was saying nannying tendencies or something. I was like, no, nanny state. Which surprised me. And in other cases where I came up with something, then he would say, "Oof, I think that's like, I think you're going a bit too far there." And then obviously it's my, got the massive respect for him, and it was just a question of, okay, do I care enough about this one? Am I sure enough of my solution to stick with it? And yeah, sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I bowed to his advice. But yeah, it's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure. It was a great pleasure.
And were you not tempted at any time to take one of these slightly more radical approaches, like this German translation to 1984, a sense that the English language will bear the Magic Mountain differently? Because I understand it that the current tradition of translation is quite anchored to really a sense of accuracy, almost sentence by sentence. We must convey what Thomas Mann is trying to express in more or less his way of doing it. But then if we go back to, say, the 18th century, that kind of translation wasn't only sort of not in fashion, but was actively thought of as this is missing the idea. What we should do is take great Latin poetry and make it great English poetry by completely transforming it, often even including sort of modern personages in place of old-fashioned ones. And it feels in our present sort of frame of mind that it would be impossible for that kind of thing to come back without it being known, like Christopher Logue's War Music.
Yeah.
It's no longer a translation. It's actively a reinvention, a paraphrase. We won't even call it that. Whereas you go back to Pope's Iliad, and that is it. It's the Iliad. He's not calling it Pope's War Music. This is a translation, which nonetheless is not line by line. As far as I'm aware, Pope wasn't at that time amazingly competent with the Greek language. So there was quite a lot of, well, I suppose it more or less means this. So I suppose just in your universe of translators and those you know and those you interact with, what is the general sentiment? Is there a sense there could ever be a return to this slightly more inventive slash destructive style, which replaces a little bit of the original author with the self, which obviously many people would be upset by, but is credible? Or is translation now refined and we've reached the point where we wouldn't do that unless we admit that we're recreating the work. It wouldn't count as a translation.
I mean, the environment is wider than just what the translators are doing. Yeah, the environment is also about the expectations of who you're translating it for, and what where are you with Oxford World's Classics, and indeed within the collection of the Thomas Mann collection. So I would say that probably at the moment we are. It's interesting with my group. There are quite a lot of different styles, and we often debate this. Most of the people in the group in Zurich, we meet once a month, they're translating from English into German. There are a few of us translating into English, or in some cases into Tajik and Hungarian and stuff like this. And I would say that there's a large body of the members of this group who would be very much on there's a central avenue here, and we can move around in this central avenue, but yeah, we're gonna stick relatively closely. But then, depending on the nature of the text, and there's a guy who runs it is currently doing the first complete translation of Finnegan's Wake into German, and he's very much in favour of just going off piece, and I gave them, for example, that thing when
no one's gonna check.
No one's going to check. Well, I mean, yeah, he can say it, the type of things that he does. He translated Infinite Jest, and he's translating Finnegan's Wake. Yeah. But I put to them, I've had a few of these situations where I put to them this Klein aber fein, which Klein aber dein, sorry, which Hans Castorp says to Claudia when she lends him his pencil, or when he gives it back. Can't remember. And I had a kind of scale, okay, well, this is really close, down to what I finally did, which was your quilt, my thrill, which is like a bit overt. It's a bit overtly sexual. And I did do that several times where I just like, okay, why not? I'm just gonna, let's bring it, we'll just bring it out. And it was very interesting in that meeting when I gave them like a shopping list on this scale, on the sliding scale, how many they were just like, oh, go for that one. Or he was definitely the Joyce translator was definitely go for that one. Like no messing around with this. But then I just translated. I was doing a sample translation of from Swiss German, which I speak into English for a magazine in Michigan, and so it's these diary entries of a woman aged between 15 and 32, all in pretty perfect Zürich Deutsch, Zurich dialect. And I took along, I was trying to work out how far I could move away from this. How much can I get the dialect in? And I took along something where I'd gone through it and I'd rendered it almost totally phonetic. And the Swiss people were totally horrified by it. They couldn't recover from it. They just thought it was sacrilege. I'd taken an axe to their language. And I said, so what do you want me to do? And they said, well, you need to treat it as if it's High German. I was like, seriously? And the guy, the Joyce translator, caught me on the way out and he just said, don't listen. He's German. Don't listen to him. So I think, yeah, you've got a variety of voices, but I'd say we are in an age of relative fidelity to the text, especially. I mean, again, in poetry, I'm sure you can take a lot more liberties than you can in prose.
And this is a big question, but it's just on the tip of my brain right now. But do you think there is a translated work that surpasses the original that you know of? One that is relatively accurate and faithful, that just maybe something about the language just makes the work better in whatever the target language is, or maybe just something about the translator had a little bit more genius energy floating around on the particular days of the translation. I mean, some would say it's impossible. Some would say it's a subordinate work. It can't really, unless you change it so much that it's a new work. But I, at least in theory, could be convinced that you could just rewrite a great novel just slightly better. Just a few sentences. Ah, yeah, it's a little bit stronger. But is this something that you've actually encountered in reality?
Well, what I do encounter is people saying about the Asterix translations. I've heard both German people saying that the German translation is better, and English people saying that the English translation is better. Whether there are French people who say that the English translation is better, I don't know about that. Now, where I do agree that at least potentially it's possible is because what are translators doing? What are we concentrating on? So the original author has the full, they're starting with a blank page. They can do whatever they like. They create this novel. The only thing that a translator has got to work with is the language. So you're just working on the level of language. So you can push the language in different directions and you can potentially kind of make the language intensify, make it more sublime. Whether anyone would actually claim this or recognize it, I don't know. But I think at least theoretically it would make sense that because our material is really just the language, that we could potentially do that. I think also that if you get a novel which is, say, I haven't read it, because say you get a novel like Joël Dickers, whatever it's called, that big one that won the Prix Goncourt 15 years ago or something, Harry Québert or something like that. A novel which is written in French but set in the US. I would think that you have really quite a lot of scope for making that novel better in American English than it is in French. I don't know what you think. I don't. Have you read
Well,
anything that which in translation with?
I in the this time through the Zauberberg, and there's a bit of a horizon of haziness here. It's unclear whether it's just because of my difficulty reading the German or what's going on, but the ecstatic, rapturous sections in the Magic Mountain, for example, the Forschungen chapter, when we go into these reveries of life as a rainbow between being and non-being, these extremely poetic, gorgeous sections, I thought of just gorgeous in the Low Porter translation. And I when I read them in German, I just looked back to see, because whether it was something to do with my memory or to do with my own sensitivity to English. But no, I think she did an extraordinary job at those sections of the novel. And if you are going to go and read just some of the English sections of the Magic Mountain, I look at how H.G. Low-Porter did the researcher's Forschungen chapter, because it's really incredible. And it's a slightly 19th century ornate English prose style. It is occasionally rather free with Mann's prose. She puts full stops in all sorts of places where they aren't in the original. Yeah, there were those sections of the Magic Mountain I thought were much more powerful to me when reading them in English, even though in German you win lots of other stuff like dialogue, characterization, the humor, the irony was not quite there in Low Porter, but those individual rapturous sections or I don't know how to describe them other than in those terms, they're really gorgeous.
Yeah.
A lot of people say the New Testament is better in most European languages than in the Greek, because in Greek it's all these spelling mistakes and grammatical errors, and if you can read Keeney Greek like a second language, then it's going to halt a lot. But if you're reading beautiful Tyndale English, the New Testament seems like a continuum from the Old Testament, just gorgeous prose.
Yeah. I mean, there is something about liberty, and there is something about particular qualities of languages, like the quality of verbs in English, which always feels like if you're dealing with any section which involves movement, which involves action, that you just have such an amazing range of verbs in English, rather than having verb qualified by an adverb, which you so often end up with in French or German. And you can get, they're just a whole load of degrees that you can get of movement and stuff, which are hard in those two languages at least.
And the Germanic Latin thing you were talking about as well, those effects that you were bringing across in Behrens and Settembrini's dialogue, the Germanic on one hand and the Latin on the other, you can really play with those effects of the bastard tongue in ways that are impossible in German. You can have a more raffinierter Deutsch, but there's something about the way that Latinate vocabulary feels in English that's very different to Latinate vocabulary in German or refined vocabulary in German.
Yeah.
It struck me that it would be just a good life's work for someone to first become proficient in most major languages. This is my first requirement. And the second is to then there's more, is to then read every translation of the Magic Mountain in every language and then rank them all. And this is the only book they ever read, because I think that will take all the time, their entire knowledge of literature, which in a way, to be honest, is what people have done with the Bible quite frequently. We'll get all the ancient languages and maybe a few modern ones, and we'll just constantly read the same book and rank them. But I think maybe more sublime if the book is a novel and does not necessarily contain metaphysical truth. How many novels are in the Magic Mountain? I'm sure it's not just the same thing in a different language, but you've got you can kind of map them out. The sublime ones, the funnier ones, the ones that are just bad books, which I'm sure there's at least a couple of like that. It's not that good. And then where does the German one come? Is it definitely top of the pile? We need to sort of spawn someone for this task. I'm not sure anyone is qualified currently, or willing would be the real, the will to read it 50 times or however many translations they've been.
Yeah, there are kind of 43 or something like that. I think something
Yeah.
like 43 languages. I just wonder, I mean, the kind of just to challenge the premise, I'm not sure, I don't know, why are we ranking? Why are we ranking these translations?
Something to
I,
do.
it's something to, but I like, there was a very good, because it's always a problem, yeah. How do people review translations, especially if they don't read the original, if they can't read the original? And I felt there was an excellent article by Tim Parks in the London Review of Books, like I don't know, a few years ago, where he looks at the translation of Proust. And I thought it was great because essentially he was just saying, okay, well, all of these. It's different if you only have time to read one of the translations, I suppose. But he's just saying all of these reveal something slightly different about the original, and so we should. And I think it was James Wood has said we should just be happy that we live kind of now, and that there are all these different translations that we can that contribute to the richness of the interpretation of this novel. Yeah, I mean, they're literary critics and they review. they they read all the time, and they don't have to ask on the forum like which translation of the Magic Mountain should I be reading because I can only read one.
And go ahead.
No, I was gonna, say we should come towards the end soonish. I've got a appointment in a few minutes. Apologies for the Wi-Fi issues if you've been having any on your side. Maybe it's been incredibly smooth over here. You've both been a bit.
You've occasionally you've lost a bit of the signal up in the mountains up there.
Precisely. On cue as well. Well, that's lost in the
Yeah.
digital abyss.
Mm.
But
But did
I
you want to
suppose,
ask one last question before you went, or were you rounding up, Jack? Were you rounding off?
I'll hand over to Milo for the last question.
yeah, well, I wonder if it's a question or a thought. We'll see what happens. But it's interesting, this notion of you just read one translation and it's the work. Because for me, the Magic Mountain is Thomas Mann and Simon Pare. That's one thing. I don't have another Magic Mountain in my brain. It feels potentially unlikely that another one will soon enter it unless I suddenly wake up with this new mission in mind. Must rank all all Magic Mountains.
Must learn 40 languages.
Yeah, one thing at a
Yeah,
time.
cracking.
But if not, I'll leave it the customary 7 years to the next one, by which time I will have forgotten sufficient sort of details of your one. So it'll be, oh, it's basically the same thing. Maybe, maybe not. And it's an interesting world, especially with these large texts that you don't really want to immediately read another one. But without having done so, to know the exact character of one translation against another is very difficult. So in a way, the translator and the author have to, in that moment, merge. And of course, you could see if you read different works by the same author with different translators, you start to pick up a sense of style, but it's always just supposing one thing or another. And I guess to rebut my own sort of competitive angle of the rankings, is the real purpose of the translation is to bring the work in some form to someone who can't or would have some kind of difficulty in reading it in its original. And so I have just received via you the Thomas Mann Magic Mountain. And as far as I can be concerned, it is Thomas Mann's. And there's always this complexity within, the transmission and the decisions and so many other things going on. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there isn't a question in here at all. It's just a reflection on all these books I will read once in one translation, know them as such, and not be exposed to another, and being okay with that as well, rather than the kind of we must find the greatest one and look at all of them and make sure I know exactly what I'm doing. It's that kind of selective ignorance I've had a magic mountain. It made me feel these kinds of ways, made me react to the world in this sort of fashion. That's all right. One is enough for now. Move on to something else, and just hope it wasn't, a complete travesty. But I'm sure this wasn't. I'm sure this
Well,
was
you
a
have
good
to-
one.
How much do you trust Richie Robertson?
Completely with my life. Why do you ask?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and even, I mean, what's interesting, I think before I read another translation of The Magic Mountain, I would be more tempted to read some of the other translations in the series of the Oxford World Classics
Oh yeah,
to,
yeah.
in order to have an idea of, okay, so we start out with the Wooden books and the early stories, and how do we, is there any way we can separate the progression of Thomas Mann's art and of his writing from the fact that these are translated by different translators? I mean, I'd be very interested just on its own to see what have the other people in my group been doing with these works. But I would also be having an idea of how Thomas Mann reads differently or reads similarly in German across his career. What does that look like in Low Porter, who translated them all, or in a disparate group of translators who are brought together under the guidance of Richie Robertson? Those are also
Yeah, and
interesting kind of reading
this
experiments.
what inspired me to read the Moncrief Proust translation, other than the claim that while not massively accurate, it is great literature, just in English. It's just a great kind of late Edwardian style English book, but also that it's one of the few attempts that, I mean, he didn't get right to the end, we'll admit, but one of the attempts to singularize it through a single voice, whereas the latest translation, which is interesting in its own right, in which each section is a
Yeah.
different translator. I wonder, are we getting all of these different books by different authors under the Proust brand, or can we
Yes.
still detect the same? It's
Yes.
almost unanswerable, but it's a fascinating notion.
It is absolutely unanswerable. I mean, we're never going to be able to separate the translator of each of these novels from the author.
Thank you so much for making the time, Simon.
No, you're very
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you to you. It's been really, really, very
Have
interesting.
a lovely
Thank you
rest
for
of your day.
preparation and your excellent questions
Thank you very
and
much.
comments and interesting comments. I will keep thinking about them.